It all started with the dinner party. Julia had insisted we host one for her colleagues. A networking opportunity, she called it. I wasn't thrilled about playing bartender all night, but she convinced me it would be fun. The guest list was long, filled with names I barely recognized, except for one. His name was Ethan. She mentioned him casually, but there was something in the way she lingered when she said his name, like it tasted sweeter than the others. The night of the party, Julia was electric. She wore a deep red dress that hugged her figure in a way that made it impossible not to stare. She was all smiles, pouring drinks, laughing too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. I was proud at first. She had this magnetic presence that always drew people in. But as the night went on, I noticed how often Ethan seemed to be at her side. Ethan was different. The kind of guy who wore tailored suits without looking like he was trying too hard. He had that easy charm, the kind that makes people lean in when he talks. At one point, I walked into the kitchen to find him standing too close to Julia. They weren't touching, but the energy between them was palpable. "Need a hand?" I asked, louder than necessary. Julia startled, like a kid caught sneaking candy before dinner. "Mark." "Yes, actually. Can you grab the dessert plates?" Ethan just smirked and stepped back, but not before giving me a look. It wasn't mocking exactly, but it wasn't respectful either. The rest of the night blurred together, but I couldn't shake the image of Julia and Ethan in the kitchen. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting. Julia was a natural flirt. It didn't mean anything. But when the guests left and it was just the two of us, the air between us felt heavier. "You seemed pretty chummy with Ethan," I said, aiming for casual but missing the mark. She rolled her eyes and waved me off. "Oh, stop. He's a colleague, Mark. Don't make it weird." It wasn't what she said. It was how she said it. Dismissive. Like my feelings didn't matter, like she was daring me to push further. I didn't, but something inside me started to crack. That night, Julia stayed up late, scrolling through her phone on the couch while I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. When she finally joined me hours later, her phone came with her, tucked under her pillow. I should have said something then, but I didn't. I just lay there, pretending to sleep, while my mind churned with questions I wasn't ready to ask. At a few days after the dinner party, things got weirder. I was home early from work, a rare occurrence, and decided to surprise Julia by making her favorite dinner. She hadn't been home much lately, always out for meetings or team-building events. But I figured a nice meal might bring some normalcy back into our lives. I had just finished setting the table when her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. It was odd. She never left her phone lying around anymore. The screen lit up with an incoming call, the name Ethan W. glowing against the black background. I froze. My brain screamed at me to ignore it, but my hand moved on its own, snatching the phone off the counter. The call ended before I could decide what to do, but my curiosity had already taken over. I swiped to her recent call log, and there it was, Ethan W. Again and again his name appeared. Calls late at night, calls during lunch breaks. I barely had time to process it before the phone buzzed again. This time it was a text. "Ethan W. Can't stop thinking about last night. When can we meet again?" My heart dropped into my stomach. Last night, Julia had told me she was working late at the office. She even texted me around 9 p.m. to say she'd be home late and not to wait up. I felt like I was in a bad movie. My hands shook as I put the phone back where I found it, exactly as it was, and stepped away like it might explode. Minutes later, I heard the front door open. Julia breezed in, her face glowing, carrying a shopping bag. She barely glanced at me. "Hey, babe," she chirped, setting the bag down. "What's for dinner?" I stared at her, the words caught in my throat. She looked so normal, so Julia. But now I knew something was lurking beneath the surface. "Chicken marsala," I managed to say, my voice tight. She glanced at the table, clearly pleased. "Wow, you're spoiling me tonight." The audacity of it nearly made me laugh. Spoiling her? After what I'd just seen. I watched her closely as she moved around the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of wine and humming a tune. Did she even feel guilty? As we sat down to eat, I tested the waters. "How was work last night?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. She didn't even flinch. "Oh, exhausting. We're in the middle of a huge campaign. I didn't get home until, midnight?" Yeah, something like that, I replied, my stomach twisting. I couldn't believe how easily the lie rolled off her tongue. If she noticed the tightness in my voice or the way I avoided looking her in the eye, she didn't show it. She just kept talking about her day, as if everything was perfectly fine. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed the text over and over, like a loop I couldn't escape. Can't stop thinking about last night. What had they done? Where had they gone? And more importantly, why was she still lying to me? I couldn't sit with it any longer. The text, the calls, the lies. It was all bubbling under my skin, making it impossible to think straight. Julia was in the shower, humming a song like she didn't have a care in the world, while I sat on the edge of the bed holding her phone in my hands. I wasn't proud of myself, but I unlocked it. She used the same passcode for everything, our anniversary, ironically. The text thread with Ethan was still open. I didn't have to scroll far to find all the proof I needed. The messages weren't explicit, but they didn't have to be. Ethan W. Can you sneak away tomorrow? Julia, not sure. Mark's been acting weird lately. Ethan W. You're worth the risk. Julia, you're sweet. I'll figure something out. My hands clenched the phone so tightly I thought it might shatter. Sneak away? Worth the risk? What risk exactly? The risk of destroying our life together? I didn't even hear her get out of the shower. Suddenly, she was standing in the doorway, a towel wrapped around her and a startled look on her face. Mark? What are you doing? She asked, her voice sharp. I held up the phone. What do you think I'm doing? Her eyes flicked to the screen and widened. Are you seriously going through my phone? Don't even start. I snapped, standing up. What the hell is this, Julia? Who is Ethan? And why is he telling you you're worth the risk? Her expression shifted instantly. The surprise melted away, replaced by a cold, defensive mask. You're invading my privacy, she said, crossing her arms. I laughed bitterly. Privacy? Are you kidding me? This isn't about privacy, Julia. This is about you sneaking around behind my back. Do you think I'm stupid? She stepped forward, her voice dropping to a calm, calculated tone that sent a chill down my spine. You're blowing this out of proportion. Ethan is just a colleague. We've been working closely on a campaign, and maybe I vented to him a bit about our marriage. That's all. I stared at her, disbelief and anger crashing over me like a wave. So now you're confiding in another man about our marriage? Do you have any idea how messed up that is? She rolled her eyes. Actually rolled her eyes. Oh, stop being so dramatic, Mark. Not everything is some grand betrayal. Maybe if you put half as much energy into our marriage as you do into snooping around, I wouldn't need someone to talk to. The words hit me like a slap. My mind raced, trying to process what she was saying. Was she seriously trying to blame me for this? So it's my fault now? I asked, my voice rising. I'm the reason you're texting another man about sneaking away? God, you're exhausting, she snapped, grabbing her phone from my hand. I can't even have a conversation without you turning it into an interrogation. Maybe I just wanted more fun and excitement in our marriage, but clearly, that's too much to ask. She stormed out of the room, leaving me standing there, stunned. Her words echoed in my head. Fun and excitement. What was that supposed to mean? And why did it feel like she had already decided where she was going to find it? The next morning, Julia acted like nothing had happened. She went about her usual routine, coffee, emails, and scrolling through her phone, while I sat at the kitchen table, staring at her like she was a stranger. I finally broke the silence. We need to talk, Julia. For real this time. She sighed, setting her mug down with an exaggerated air of annoyance. Mark, I already told you, there's nothing going on. Can we drop this? No, we can't drop it. I shot back. I've been trying to figure out how to fix whatever's broken between us. But I can't do that if you're not even willing to be honest. Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time, I saw something raw underneath her calm exterior. Fine. You want honesty? Here it is. I'm bored, Mark. Our marriage feels like a job. I go to work, I come home, and it's the same thing every day. There's no passion, no spark. I wanted more fun and excitement in our marriage, but every time I tried to bring it up, you just brushed me off. I blinked, stunned. Fun and excitement? Julia, we've built a life together. A real life, not some fairy tale. You think I don't miss the thrill of the beginning, too? But that's not what marriage is about. It's about showing up for each other, even when it's hard. She leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. Exactly. You think showing up is enough, but it's not. I need more, Mark. The room was silent for a moment, heavy with unspoken accusations. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. And Ethan? What's he giving you that I'm not? Her lips parted, but no words came out. Instead, her eyes flickered with something close to guilt. It's not about him, she said finally. It's about us. Or maybe what we've become. I stood up, unable to sit still any longer. You're deflecting. Don't think I didn't see those texts, Julia. Worth the risk? What does that even mean? Do you understand what you're risking? Our marriage, our home, everything we've built together. She looked away, avoiding my gaze. Then, she said something that sent my world spiraling. Maybe we should try an open marriage. I froze, certain I hadn't heard her correctly. What? She lifted her chin, her voice unervingly steady. You're so worried about what Ethan and I talk about. Fine, let's take the mystery out of it. If you're not enough for me and I'm not enough for you, maybe we should explore other options. People do it all the time, Mark. It doesn't mean we don't love each other. Are you out of your mind? I exploded. You think this is some modern solution to avoid addressing the real issues between us? Do you even hear yourself? Her expression hardened. You asked me what I needed, and I'm telling you, if you're not willing to try, then maybe you're the one giving up on this marriage. I laughed bitterly, running a hand through my hair. Oh, don't you dare. Don't you dare put this on me. You want to turn our marriage into a free-for-all because you're chasing some fantasy of excitement. That's not love, Julia. That's selfish. She stood up, pushing her chair back with a screech. At least I'm being honest about what I need. You're just stuck in your little box, too scared to admit that maybe you can't make me happy anymore. Her words hit like a dagger. I couldn't decide if I wanted to scream or collapse. Instead, I just stared at her, the woman I thought I knew, as she turned and walked out of the kitchen. I didn't follow her this time. Couldn't. My mind was spinning, my chest tight. She had just tossed out the idea of an open marriage like it was a new coat of paint for a stale room. And worst of all, I wasn't sure if she was testing me, or if she'd already decided to go through with it. I spent the next day at work, pretending to be focused while my mind churned with everything Julia had said. An open marriage? Was that her solution? I couldn't shake the feeling that her suggestion wasn't just hypothetical. It felt like she was laying the groundwork for something she'd already started. By the time I got home, I'd made up my mind. I needed answers. Real answers. The kind you don't get from a staged conversation. Julia was in the living room when I walked in, her laptop open, but she quickly minimized whatever she was working on. Hey, she said, her tone overly casual. Hey, I replied, trying to match her energy. How was your day? Busy, she said with a shrug, standing to stretch. What about you? Same. I dropped my bag in the hallway and went into the kitchen, my pulse hammering in my ears. She didn't follow me, which gave me the chance I needed. Her laptop was still open on the coffee table, the screen dim but not locked. I walked back into the living room and made a show of grabbing a magazine from the side table. Then I leaned over, pretending to straighten some papers next to her laptop. With one hand, I quickly tapped the trackpad, bringing the screen to life. Her email was open. The subject line of the top message froze me in place. Subject: last night from Ethan W. I glanced over my shoulder. Julia was in the bathroom now, the door closed. I couldn't hear the shower, so I knew I had seconds at best. My fingers trembled as I opened the email. Ethan W. You left your scarf in my car. Should I drop it off? Or do you want to come pick it up? Either way, I'd love to see you again. Last night was incredible. There it was. The confirmation I didn't want but couldn't avoid. Last night, she told me she was meeting her friend Claire for drinks. Claire, the one who always covered for her when I asked too many questions. I didn't stop to think. I clicked the thread. My eyes scanned the previous messages, my stomach churning with each line. They'd been meeting for weeks, sneaking around under the guise of late meetings and girls' nights. There were no explicit details, but it didn't matter. The emotional betrayal was loud and clear. I barely had time to process before I heard the bathroom door open. I closed the email and sat back on the couch, forcing myself to look calm. Julia walked in, towel drying her hair, and froze when she saw me sitting near her laptop. Her eyes darted to the screen, then back to me. "What are you doing?" she asked, her tone sharp. I met her gaze, my jaw tightening. "I think the better question is, what have you been doing?" She blinked, caught off guard. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Your emails, Julia. Don't even try to lie this time. I saw the messages. I saw everything." Her face paled for a moment, but then she squared her shoulders, a flicker of defiance in her eyes. "So now you're invading my privacy again? Are you seriously that insecure? You're really going to stand there and talk about privacy when you've been sneaking around with him for weeks? Do you even hear yourself?" She folded her arms, her expression cold. "What do you want me to say, Mark? That I'm sorry? That I regret it? Fine. I'm sorry, but I don't regret it. You've been so checked out of this marriage for years that I didn't think you'd even notice." I stared at her, stunned by the venom in her words. "Checked out? I've been doing everything I can to make this work, Julia. You're the one who's been running around with someone else while I've been trying to keep us together." "Maybe that's the problem," she shot back. "You think keeping us together is enough. But it's not. I want more than just surviving Mark. And Ethan. He makes me feel alive." Her words hit me like a sledgehammer. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She wasn't just admitting to the affair. She was justifying it, as if her feelings somehow made it acceptable. "You've already made your choice, haven't you?" I asked quietly. She didn't answer, but the silence told me everything I needed to know. Her silence was louder than any confession she could have made. I sat there, staring at her, waiting for something, anything, that might salvage the wreckage between us. But Julia just stood there, arms crossed, as if daring me to push her further. "Say something," I demanded, my voice low and shaking. "What do you want me to say, Mark?" She snapped, her eyes blazing. "That I'll stop seeing Ethan? That I'll magically fall back into this boring, lifeless marriage? You want me to lie to you some more?" "Lifeless," I barked, standing up so abruptly the coffee table rattled. "You think this is boring? This house, this life we built? You think I'm boring? Maybe you should have said something before you decided to fix it by sneaking around with some guy behind my back." "Oh, don't act like you're a saint," she shot back, stepping closer. "You've been so wrapped up in your work, your routines, your goddamn normal life, that you didn't even notice when I started slipping away. Ethan noticed. He actually listens to me. He makes me feel like I matter." I stared at her, my breath coming fast. "And you think that's an excuse? You think feeling special gives you the right to throw away everything we've been through together? You're unbelievable, Julia." She didn't back down. In fact, she stepped closer, her voice dropping to a deadly calm. "You know what's unbelievable? That it took this to finally get a reaction out of you. For years, I've been asking for more, and you've given me nothing. I'm done apologizing for wanting something better." The finality in her tone hit me like a gut punch. I realized then that this wasn't a fight. It wasn't even a negotiation. Julia had already checked out. She was just waiting for me to figure it out. "You've already made up your mind, haven't you?" I asked, my voice hollow. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't deny it. "Wow," I muttered, running a hand through my hair. "So that's it. You're done with us. With me." She hesitated, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of regret in her eyes. But then it was gone, replaced by the same icy defiance she'd worn all night. "I don't know, Mark," she said finally, her voice quieter now. "Maybe we're just not right for each other anymore. Maybe we've been holding on to something that doesn't work." I shook my head, letting out a bitter laugh. "You don't know? You've been running around with Ethan for weeks, Julia. Don't act like this is some philosophical debate. You know exactly what you want. You just don't have the guts to say it." She flinched, and for the first time, I saw her confidence crack. But she recovered quickly, squaring her shoulders and lifting her chin. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I don't have the guts to say it. But I do know I'm tired of pretending. I want to be happy, Mark. And if you can't give me that, then I'll find it somewhere else. The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to go off. I stared at her, my heart pounding, as the weight of what she'd just said settled over me. This wasn't just a fight. This wasn't just about Ethan. This was the end. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the living room. I didn't slam the door, didn't yell. I just walked into our bedroom, closed the door behind me, and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. I felt like a ghost in my own home. Everything we'd built, every memory, every promise. It all felt like it had been ripped away in a single conversation. And the worst part? I didn't know if I even wanted to fight for her anymore. The silence in the house was suffocating. Julia didn't come to bed that night, and I didn't go looking for her. She wasn't mine anymore, that much was clear. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind churning. By morning, I had made up my mind. If she was so desperate to chase her fun and excitement, then I'd give her the freedom to do it. But I wasn't going to go quietly. When I came downstairs, she was in the kitchen, sipping coffee and scrolling on her phone like nothing had happened. The sight of her sitting there, calm and detached, made my blood boil. "Good morning," she said without looking up, her tone flat. "Morning," I replied evenly, walking to the counter to pour myself a cup of coffee. For a moment we stood in silence, the tension between us thick enough to choke on. "I've been thinking," I said finally, my voice calm but firm. She glanced up, one eyebrow raised. "About what?" "About what you said. About the open marriage." Her eyes widened slightly, and I saw a flicker of surprise. "Really?" "Yeah," I said, turning to face her. "If that's what you need to be happy, I won't stand in your way." Her expression shifted, guarded but intrigued. "I didn't think you'd come around so quickly." I shrugged. "I just want you to be honest with me, Julia. If you're not happy, then let's figure out a way to fix it. Even if that means trying something unconventional." She hesitated, studying me carefully, like she was trying to figure out if this was some kind of trap. "That's surprising, but I guess I appreciate your willingness to consider it." "Good," I said, my tone neutral, "because if we're going to do this, there need to be rules, boundaries, transparency." She nodded slowly. "Of course. What kind of boundaries?" "For starters, no lies," I said, my voice sharp. "If you're going to see him, I want to know when, where, and for how long. No sneaking around. No covering for each other. This only works if everything's out in the open." She swallowed, her confidence wavering for a moment. "That's fair. And one more thing," I added, stepping closer. "If you're free to explore other options, so am I." Her face stiffened, the color draining slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean it's not a one-way street, Julia. If you want to see other people, then so do I. That's the deal." She stared at me, her jaw tightening. "You've never even looked at another woman, Mark. Don't pretend this is something you want." "You're right," I said, my voice low. "It's not something I want. But I didn't want this either. So if this is the road we're taking, we're both walking it." She didn't respond, but I could see the gears turning in her mind. This wasn't how she'd envisioned things playing out, and it rattled her. "Fine," she said finally, her tone clipped. "If that's what it takes to make this work, then fine." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. Even though my chest was tight with anger and pain, I wasn't doing this to fix anything. I was doing it to lay the groundwork for my own plan. Julia thought she was in control, that she'd broken me. But she was wrong. I wasn't about to let her have her cake and eat it too. If she wanted a game, I'd play. But the rules would be mine. The next few days felt like a performance, one where Julia played the carefree lead, and I was the quiet, cooperative supporting role. She moved through the house with a smug air, as if she'd won some unspoken battle. But I wasn't about to let her rewrite the rules of our marriage without consequences. I watched her closely, taking mental notes of every inconsistency, every flicker of hesitation when she spoke about her plans. I wasn't just going to let her manipulate me into this nightmare. I was going to get the truth and decide how to take back control of my life. The first real test came on a Friday evening. Julia casually mentioned that she had a team dinner to attend. She didn't bother to look at me when she said it, just grabbed her coat and handbag and called out, "Don't wait up." I smiled faintly. "Have fun." The moment the door closed behind her, I sprang into action. I wasn't proud of what I was about to do, but pride wasn't my priority anymore. I grabbed the second phone I'd purchased earlier that week, one with a new number, and texted Claire, her supposed best friend. Me, "Hey, Claire. Julia just left for dinner. Hope you two have a great time." It took less than a minute for her reply to come through. "Claire. Dinner? What dinner? I'm home with my kids, Mark." I stared at the screen, a grim sense of satisfaction settling over me. So much for her team dinner. With that confirmed, I moved to step 2. I'd installed a small GPS tracker in Julia's car a few days earlier. A last resort, something I never thought I'd have to use. I opened the tracking app on my phone and watched the blinking dot move across the map. She wasn't headed downtown, where the restaurant she mentioned was located. Instead, she was driving toward the outskirts of the city, toward a neighborhood I didn't recognize. I grabbed my keys and followed her. The drive felt surreal, like I was trapped in someone else's life. I kept my distance, staying far enough behind that she wouldn't notice me. After about 20 minutes, her car turned into the driveway of a modest house. The porch light was on, and standing in the doorway was Ethan. My hands tightened around the steering wheel as I parked a block away, far enough that she wouldn't see my car. I sat there, watching her step out of the car and walk up to him, laughing at something he said. He leaned in to kiss her cheek, his hand resting casually on her lower back. I should have felt rage, but instead, I felt something colder, sharper, a kind of calm determination. This wasn't just a betrayal. This was the confirmation I needed to move forward. I took out my phone and snapped a few pictures. They weren't perfect, grainy and dark, but they were clear enough to show what was happening. For the next hour, I stayed in the car, watching the lights inside the house flicker on and off. I didn't need to know what they were doing. The truth was already glaringly obvious. When Julia finally came out, her hair slightly tousled, and got into her car, I waited for her to drive off before starting my engine. By the time I got home, she was already there, sitting on the couch with a glass of wine. She looked up and smiled faintly when I walked in. "How was your evening?" I asked, my voice perfectly even. "Good," she replied, taking a sip of her wine. "The dinner went long, but it was productive." I stared at her, marveling at how easily she lied, how effortlessly she played the role of the devoted wife. "Glad to hear it," I said, forcing a small smile. I didn't confront her then. I wasn't ready yet. There were still pieces of this puzzle I needed to fit together. But as I walked past her to the bedroom, I knew one thing for certain. The game had just begun. The days after Julia's team dinner were some of the most surreal of my life. Every interaction with her felt like a game of chess, where every move I made had to be calculated, deliberate. She thought she had me fooled, thought her lies were airtight. She didn't realize I was 2 steps ahead. The pictures I'd taken of her and Ethan weren't just sitting in my phone. They were the cornerstone of my plan. I'd already contacted a lawyer, quietly laying the groundwork for what needed to happen next. If Julia wanted out of this marriage so badly, I'd give her the exit she was chasing, but on my terms, not hers. That Friday, I decided to accelerate the timeline. Julia had mentioned another work event that evening, and I encouraged her to go. "You deserve a break," I told her, keeping my voice light. "Don't worry about me. I'll just have a quiet night in." She hesitated for half a second, her eyes flickering with something I couldn't quite read, but then she smiled. "Thanks, Mark. You're the best." She left at 7 p.m. sharp, dressed in a casual outfit that looked like she'd thrown it together in a hurry. But I knew better. This time I didn't follow her. I didn't need to. The GPS tracker in her car told me everything I needed to know. She went straight to Ethan's house again. Instead of trailing her, I drove downtown to a bar. Not to drink, but to gather witnesses. I met up with an old friend, Ben, someone I trusted to keep his mouth shut until the time was right. I texted him earlier that day, giving him a vague excuse about needing to catch up. We stayed for a couple of hours, chatting and laughing, while I made sure to leave a trail, receipts, timestamps, even a couple of selfies with Ben in the background. By 10 p.m., I excused myself and headed home. Julia arrived shortly after me, her demeanor as breezy as ever. "How was your quiet night?" she asked, kicking off her shoes and flopping onto the couch. "It was nice," I replied, sitting across from her. How was your event? Exhausting, she said, running a hand through her hair. Networking can be so draining sometimes. I stared at her, the lies rolling off her tongue like it was second nature. Part of me wanted to confront her right then and there, to lay everything out and watch her try to wriggle her way out of it. But I wasn't ready yet. The timing had to be perfect. Instead, I smiled. Sounds rough. Want me to pour you a glass of wine? She smiled back, her guard completely down. You're too good to me, Mark. That was the moment I knew. She was too comfortable, too confident that I was the gullible, doting husband she'd pegged me to be. I poured her wine, handed it to her, and sat back down. Inside, I was already planning my next move. The trap was set. All I had to do now was wait for her to step into it. The trap sprung sooner than I expected. By Saturday afternoon, Julia had set herself up perfectly for what I had planned. She was sitting at the dining table, typing furiously on her laptop. She'd mentioned earlier that she had a work thing on Sunday, a brunch meeting to finalize a campaign. I'd nodded along, biting back the urge to laugh. By now, I knew better than to take anything she said at face value. Around 3 p.m., her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, then quickly swiped the notification away. It was subtle, but I caught the slight smirk that played across her lips. That work thing tomorrow, I said casually. Where is it again? Her head snapped up, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of panic in her eyes. Oh, just a little cafe downtown. Nothing fancy. Sounds nice, I said, keeping my tone neutral. Do you want me to drop you off? Parking downtown can be a pain. No, she said quickly, too quickly. Then she laughed, waving a hand. I mean, that's sweet of you, but it's fine. I'll drive myself. I nodded, filing away her reaction. She was nervous. Good. That night, I stayed up late, making sure everything was ready. I double-checked the photos I'd taken, the GPS logs, the screenshots of her texts that I'd managed to pull from her laptop's synced accounts. Everything was in place. By the time I went to bed, I felt a strange calm wash over me. Tomorrow, this charade would finally end. The confrontation the next morning, Julia left the house in a rush, claiming she was running late for her meeting. I waited until she was gone before grabbing my car keys. This time, I didn't rely on the GPS tracker. I already knew where she was going. By the time I pulled up outside Ethan's house, her car was parked in the driveway. The curtains were drawn, and the house looked quiet, but I knew better. I sat there for a few minutes, steadying my nerves. Then I stepped out of the car and walked up to the door. I knocked 3 times, loud enough to echo through the quiet neighborhood. It didn't take long for the door to open. Ethan stood there, wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt, his hair disheveled. His relaxed expression shifted to confusion when he saw me. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone wary. "I think you know who I am," I said calmly. Before he could respond, Julia's voice came from inside the house. "Who is it?" Her footsteps approached, and then she appeared behind Ethan, her face going pale the moment she saw me. She froze, her eyes darting between me and Ethan, like she was trying to decide how to spin this. "Mark," she said finally, her voice shaky. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," I replied, stepping forward. "Funny, I don't remember your work brunch being at Ethan's house." Ethan looked at her, his brow furrowing. "You told him you were at a work meeting?" "Shut up, Ethan," she hissed, her voice snapping. "Wow," I said, my tone dripping with sarcasm. "What a team you two make." Julia stepped forward, blocking the doorway as if she could keep me out. "Mark, this isn't the time or place for this. Let's go home and talk." "Home?" I said, laughing bitterly. "You mean the place where you've been lying to me for months?" "No, Julia, we're not going anywhere. This ends here." I pulled out my phone and held up the photos I'd taken, along with the screenshots of her texts. "I have all the proof I need, so don't bother lying. Don't insult me by trying to twist this anymore." Her face twisted with anger, then panic, then something that looked like desperation. "Mark, please, we can talk about this. You don't have to." "I don't have to what?" I cut her off, my voice rising. "Expose you? Stand up for myself? Do you even hear yourself, Julia? You've destroyed everything we built, and now you're begging me to keep quiet. Ethan stepped in, raising his hands. Hey man, I didn't know. I turned on him, cutting him off. Save it. You knew exactly what you were doing. Julia grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. Mark, let's leave. Now. I shook her off, stepping back. No, Julia. You've made your choices. And now I'm making mine. I turned and walked back to my car, leaving her and Ethan standing there in stunned silence. The sound of the car door slamming shut was the most satisfying noise I'd heard in months. As I drove away, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger, sadness, and a flicker of relief. This wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had control. Julia had wanted fun and excitement. She'd gotten exactly what she asked for. And now, so would I. By the time I got home, the adrenaline had worn off, leaving a strange emptiness in its place. The confrontation at Ethan's house had been cathartic in a way, but it hadn't brought the closure I'd hoped for. If anything, it had opened up more questions. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the pile of documents my lawyer had prepared. Divorce papers. The words felt heavy in my mind, but there was no avoiding them anymore. Julia had made her choice, and now it was time for me to make mine. About an hour later, I heard the sound of Julia's car pulling into the driveway. My jaw tightened as the door opened and she stepped inside. Mark, she said, her voice wary. We need to talk. I didn't look up. Talk? Like you've been so honest with me this whole time. She hesitated, then sat down across from me. I know you're angry. Angry? I interrupted, finally meeting her eyes. Julia, I'm way past angry. I'm at the part where I'm figuring out how to rebuild my life without you. Her face twisted with something that looked like regret, but I wasn't falling for it. Mark, please. I made a mistake. I slammed my hand on the table, making her jump. A mistake? A mistake is forgetting to pay a bill or burning dinner. Sneaking around with Ethan for months? That's not a mistake, Julia. That's a choice. A selfish, deliberate choice. She flinched but didn't look away. I know I hurt you, and I'm sorry, but I still love you, Mark. I don't want to throw everything away over this. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. You don't want to throw it away? You already did, Julia. The moment you decided Ethan was worth more to you than this marriage, you threw it all away. For a moment, she looked like she might cry, but I couldn't find it in me to care. Not anymore. What do you want me to do? She asked finally, her voice small. I leaned back in my chair, my gaze cold. Sign the papers. Her eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw real panic. Divorce? Mark, come on. We can fix this. We can go to counseling or... I cut her off. Fix this? Julia, there's nothing left to fix. You didn't just break my trust, you shattered it. And the worst part? You don't even seem to understand why what you did was so wrong. You don't regret the affair. You only regret getting caught. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I wasn't moved. I'd spent too many nights lying awake, replaying every lie she told me, wondering what I'd done wrong. Now, I realized the problem wasn't me. It was her. Mark, please, she whispered, reaching across the table to take my hand. I pulled my hand back, standing up. No, Julia. You made your bed and now you get to lie in it. Alone. I walked out of the kitchen, leaving her sitting there with the papers in front of her. This time I didn't look back. As I shut the bedroom door behind me, I felt a strange sense of finality. This wasn't how I'd imagined my life would turn out, but I knew one thing for certain. I deserved better than this, and now I was finally taking the first step toward finding it. The morning after our confrontation, Julia was gone. Her car wasn't in the driveway, and neither was she. I wasn't surprised. She'd probably gone to Ethan's or maybe to clear her head. But it didn't matter. Her absence wasn't just physical, it was symbolic. She'd checked out of our marriage long before I'd caught her. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the divorce papers I'd left out the night before. Her signature wasn't on them yet, but I knew it was only a matter of time. Around noon, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Julia. Julia, I need time to think. Please don't make any rash decisions. I stared at the text for a long moment, my anger simmering just below the surface. Time to think? She'd had all the time in the world while she was sneaking around with Ethan. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel the need to respond. Instead, I picked up the phone and called my lawyer. "Go ahead and file," I said. Once the call was done, I felt a weight lift from my chest. It wasn't relief, not entirely. It was more like clarity. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but at least it was mine now. No more lies, no more deceit. A visit from an unexpected guest 2 days later. Ethan showed up at my door. I opened it to find him standing there, looking sheepish and uncomfortable. He was holding a scarf, Julia's, I realized immediately. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice cold. "Look, He trailed off, running a hand through his hair. "I didn't come here to fight. I just thought you should know. Julia's been staying with me, but she's a mess. She keeps saying she doesn't know what she wants." I laughed bitterly. "Sounds like a you problem, not a me problem." He shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't mean for things to get this complicated. I didn't think—" "No," I interrupted, stepping forward. You didn't think about me, about our marriage, or about the damage you were causing. So don't stand here and try to make me feel sorry for you because you're finally dealing with the fallout." He opened his mouth to say something but closed it again, his expression tense. "Here's some free advice," I continued, my voice low. "When someone is willing to betray the person they promised to love and honor, they'll eventually betray you too. Good luck with that." I slammed the door in his face, leaning against it as a flood of emotions hit me all at once. Anger, hurt, even a strange sense of pity for Ethan. But mostly I felt relief. Relief that I was no longer part of their toxic web. A new beginning over the next few weeks. I threw myself into rebuilding my life. I started going to the gym again, reconnecting with old friends and focusing on work. It wasn't easy. There were moments when the loneliness crept in, when I missed the life I thought I had. But with every passing day, I felt stronger, lighter. Julia tried to reach out a few times, sending long, apologetic texts about how she was confused and needed closure. I didn't respond. She'd made her choices, and now I was making mine. The divorce finalized faster than I expected. Signing those papers was bittersweet, but it also felt like closing a chapter I'd outgrown. As I walked out of the courthouse on the final day, the sun was shining, and the air felt crisp. For the first time in months, I smiled, a real, genuine smile. Julia had wanted fun and excitement. What she didn't realize was that those things were fleeting. What I wanted, what I deserved, was something real, something lasting. And now I was free to find it.